We are going to move on now. I'm going to introduce Dr. Jon Broome, who's going to lead our way into our infamous mock adjudication.
Right, so could Leslie Hunt, representing the client, come up? And could John Rayner, representing the contractor, come up, please? And if you sit at opposite ends of the table over there, you've got a screen there you can see. So we will have 3 or 4 adjudications depending on time. And how it works is that I gave an overview of the facts of the case. The referring party then gives their side, which actually is the contractor in all cases. The respondent, which is Leslie, then gives theirs. And then in a late change, but a very good change by Glenn, it's new. You don't vote when that slide comes up. You have a 2-minute discussion with the person next to you about the pros and cons and what you think. And then we vote. I then give my opinion, which is the right opinion. Okay. Then we look at observations and lessons learned. Okay. I'm not sure if that laughter about my right opinion was good or not. So what we're going to go into is case number 1, and I give the facts. So the contractor, as a consultant, under the professional services contract, developed a method statement, an MS, to build a new structure in the vicinity of a network rail asset, a railway. It did not know if it would get this contract, but obviously it thought, hey, I'm in pole position if I do this. It was signed off by Network Rail as complying with their and other relevant standards. That method statement had the contractor's headings, logos, etc. on it, and it was included in the contract by reference from contract data part 1, which is the client's contract data. So the client included it. The client also stated that any contractor methodology has to comply with all current Network Rail and other relevant standards, so current ones. Earlier in the contract, and this is loosely based on a true story, Network Rail changed their standards. The method statement no longer complied with the revised standard. So they had to have a major rethink about how the hell are we going to actually construct this thing. The contractor, who'd have thought, thinks this is a compensation event. The client, who'd have thought, doesn't think. So, over to you, John.
Thank you, Mr. Adjudicator. Now, obviously, the method statement was prepared by ourselves. It was compliant with Network Rail standards. That's without a doubt. Absolutely. We've complied fully with our obligations under the professional services contract, but that is irrelevant as far as we're concerned because we're now in a separate contract. And everybody knows that under the NEC contracts, they're entire agreement contracts. And the professional services contract was not referenced in that. The client's inclusion of our document in the contract is independent of its preparer. It could have been prepared by anybody. And clearly therefore, the client knew that the method statement was compliant at the contract date. It's custom and practice also that within the industry that standards are frozen at the contract date. How is it possible to ever think ahead and allow for changing standards? That never happens, so contracts and standards become fixed at that point in time. The contract does state that the contractor methodology has to comply with the standards, well, quite clearly, because if standards change, the contractor has to comply with them. However, that doesn't mean that the scope changes automatically. This method statement, by reference from CD1, is client methodology. It's not contractor methodology. It's therefore client scope and not contractor methodology. It's nothing that we have prepared at this point in time. Even if the method statement is considered contractor scope, it's not the contractor scope for its design, per the second bullet point of clause 60.1, brackets 1. So any change there too is not excluded from the provisions of clause 60.11. The change made by Network Rail to the standards, resulting in a requirement to change the client's methodology, is a clear change to the scope. It's made after the contract date, and it therefore constitutes a compensation event. This would be the same situation, irrespective of any contractor undertaking the work.
Shaking her head in a sad way. Clearly, she thinks John's delusional. No, John. Anyway, Leslie.
With what we agree with. The method statement was provided under a PSC contract as ECI work to support the development of the project. And the ECC contract is an output of that design work. I have never had a contractor argue that his work is actually mine. It is accepted that the method statement was compliant with National Rail standards at the contract date, but it would have been, and it is agreed that it would have been included no matter who became the contractor in the ECC contract. However, any changes to the scope provided by the contractor in order to comply with the scope provided by the client, i.e. National Rail standards, that's client scope, does not constitute a CE under 60.1. So why is this method statement contractor scope? The contract data of both the ECC contract and the PSC contract identifies this specific person as being the same legal entity. Therefore, in this specific instance, not in all instances, the consultant is the contractor. The method statement is covered with the contractor's branding. It is clearly theirs. 60.1 doesn't state a change to the scope provided by the contractor under this contract. It merely states the contractor's design. The scope does not mention National Rail standards current at the contract date. It merely references the standards. Therefore, when the standards change, the contractor needs to comply, and this is not a compensation event.
Okay, so that's the two sides. So remember, the late change, you are not to vote straight away. You're to have 2 minutes conversation. Whereupon, I'm not allowed to do my klaxon. I have to go like that, okay? So,
Profile.
yeah, okay. So I'll go back one slide. 2 minutes starting now. Okay, so remember we've done it so that Leslie has a red jumper on and John is wearing a blue shirt just to avoid any confusion if you want to make it personal, okay? Time to vote. Those who think that John as the contractor is in the right. Oh, the vast majority. Oh, it seems.
Sensible people
Those
in the
who
room.
think Leslie's in the right. Oh, only if you... Oh!
Clients in the room.
Okay. Right, okay, so the relevant clause is in 60.1 brackets 0.1 is this one. It's project manager gives an instruction changing the scope, any scope, except, and if we go down to that second bullet point, a change to the scope provided by the contractor for its design, which is made at second sub-bullet point in order to comply with the scope provided by the client. Okay, so it's not in dispute. The scope provided by the client says it has to comply with Network Rail standards. Is it scope provided by the contractor or is it scope provided by the client? So, given that, at the time of preparing the method statement, the contractor did not know if it would be the contractor under the end during construction contract. It was a front runner, but it did not know. It is referenced from contract data part 1 and therefore included by in the contract by the client, yeah? Okay, so the client is the one who chose to include it in the contract, all right? Even though its origins are from the contractor. And it is stretching the meaning of design to say it means a method statement, Right? There are alternative words in the contract, like to provide the works, or a constraint on how the contractor provides the works, which are method statements. It does not use that word in that second sub-bullet point. It's for its design. All this implies, quite strongly in my opinion, on the balance of probability, that the method statement is not the contractor's scope for its design, so the project manager should have given an instruction changing the scope. Consequently, I think you know what's coming. Jon is the winner in this instance. Okay, so the observations and lessons learned. Well, this is based on a real adjudication where actually the adjudicator, it wasn't in dispute whether it was a compensation event, it was did it arise from the fault of the contractor. Anyway, the adjudicator decided it wasn't a compensation event, answered the question which wasn't asked of him. But anyway, so it went against your opinion. But should the engineering construction contract be amended to make it clear which contract data a document is referenced from makes it client or contractor scope? Yeah, so it's not in debate. And that the contractor's scope can include for how it is to provide the works rather than just its design. So if you've got one of my regular clients, Connect Plus, who run the M25, methodology is really important. Yeah, they can't shut down the M25 while they build an asset. That might be one of the reasons why, well, not in their framework, but a contractor is chosen, your methodology. Therefore, it should be incorporated into the contract. Regardless, if faced with a similar situation, it's in both parties' interest that legal and contract certainty is established. Yeah? So I would hope that the NEC steering group would make the change in NEC 5 whenever it comes out. But if it's in your contract, you might wish to make it yourself. It's a very simple change to make. Okay, so case number 2, the facts. Same contract as before. Prior to being awarded the construction contract, the contractor had developed a comprehensive risk register. The risk register had identified a physical condition risk with a very low probability, so less than 1 in 100, and a financial impact if it occurred of up to £20,000 is what they put in there. Yeah. The contractor had therefore included £200 in his prices, a hundredth of 20,000. The risk register was referenced into the contract from the contract data part 2 as matters to be included in the early warning register. Unfortunately, the physical condition has occurred and the financial impact was £100,000-ish, so an awful lot more than the £20,000 most likely which the contractor had put in. The contractor thinks this is a compensation event and wants the full value, minus, very graciously, the £200 risk allowance, while the client / project manager do not think it's a compensation event at all. So, Jon.
Thank you, Mr. Adjudicator. Well, this one's got a bit more detail around it. The occurrence of those physical conditions we've encountered clearly meets the criteria for a compensation event. We judged that there was a less than 1 in 100 chance of the risk occurring, and it would have been unreasonable for us to make a full allowance for that risk. The preparation of our risk register is nothing more than a risk assessment process that any competent contractor would go through. Anyone with the vaguest clue about risk assessments would understand that the allowance generated is merely a function of a competent risk assessment process, and it does not affect the interpretation of the terms of the contract. The conditions for triggering a compensation event in this scenario is not that we could have foreseen it, but it's unreasonable for us to allow for it. The existence of our risk register nor any allowance within it does not affect the contract interpretation. The contract does not refer to the risk register in that regard, and the test is whether a competent contractor, and that's not us, but any competent contractor, would have judged at the contract date whether the risk should have been allowed for. The project manager is attempting to conflate the presence of a risk register with the provisions of the contract. It's not making a proper independent assessment and is doing so merely to avoid our true and proper entitlement. The occurrence of physical conditions is a compensation event, and we're being more than fair in offering to release our risk allowance, especially since there is no contractual basis to do so.
Okay, and Leslie as the client.
Let's start again with what we agree with. We know, as the contractor does, that a project risk register is not the same as the risk register that is used within the assessment of compensation events. And the items and allowances are completely independent of the assessment of this compensation event. Having just lost an adjudication, we believe this contractor is quite experienced. They were part of an ECI process where they got to really know what was going on the project, and multiple lines of the project risk register and risk allowance within their tender prices indicates they have a good understanding of the risks and the works and their associated risks. The contractor made an allowance of £200 within their prices. This indicates they were aware of the risk and priced for it. 6112 only refers to whether the risks should have been allowed for, not whether the allowance was sufficient. In any case, there were multiple allowances put in the risk register for risks with a similarly low chance of occurring. Many of the other risks on the register, which also have allowances, have not materialised. And in early open communications, the contractor valued the event at its full value minus the 200, implying that this is a dispute over quantum. It isn't. It is a dispute over principle, and a principle that the contractor has already conceded.
Right, okay. So, again, I'll flick between the slides a little bit, put 2 minutes starting from now. Okay. Another change from the client. He would like you to put up your red or blue cards at the same time. Okay, so 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, so I think looking at that, there's more reds than blues, but it's certainly more even than before. So, thank you very much. So, here's the right decision. So, the relevant clause is 60.112, which states, and you can read it, yeah, okay? And the bit to focus on is an experienced contractor would have judged at the contract date to have such a small chance of occurring that it would have been unreasonable to have allowed for them. That's something that gets to the nub of it. So, the test is whether an experienced contractor, a generalised experienced contractor, not this contractor, yeah? Okay, would have judged. Both parties seem to be arguing that the contractor is an experienced contractor, although the contractor uses the word competent. I looked up whether to be competent, you had to be experienced, and it's not a necessary prerequisite, but it's a likely prerequisite, a probable prerequisite. So I read that to say, as a proxy, this contractor is an experienced contractor. Yeah? Okay. So the contractor did allow £200 in its pre-contract risk register. So this experienced contractor did allow something for it at the contract date, albeit much less than it actually cost. But they did allow something, yeah? Okay, evidentially allowed something. So the fact that the contractor only had allowed £200 is not relevant. It's the fact that they allowed something, and therefore, as a proxy for an experienced contractor, right, they identified a risk. That's not necessarily enough, but the fact that they definitely made an allowance for it, however small, is the bit that's important. So the right answer is that it's not a compensation event, okay? All right. Okay, so... Woo! So, round of applause for Leslie. So, what's the lesson learned? As a tendering contractor, be careful about entering physical condition risk in a pre-contract risk stroke early warning register. It could undermine your assessment to a compensation. But I would say there's good practice. That is new, as in, well, it was introduced in NEC 4. Clause 60.121 says you can put in specific compensation events. Yeah? And there's also been a fair amount of publicity around using geotechnical baseline reports, yeah? And that might be where you refer and get these specific things out there, and then you avoid any argument at all whether it is or isn't a compensation event, hopefully, okay? So I would say that's the good practice to use. Okay, going on to possibly the last one, unless we get through it very fast. We've got a different NEC 4. Early contractor involvement, design and build contract to build a rail depot. It was a modified engineering construction, ECI, as in stage 2 was done under option A, the price contract rather than target cost. Network rail standards required an earthing and bonding strategy and associated design and installation if required. This was included in the client scope. Okay, so it's a contractual requirement at ECI stage. The strategy was developed in the ECI stage 1 with the understanding Network Rail would design and install it as part of a wider upgrade. So it wasn't just for the rail depot, it was a wider one. That's why Network Rail were doing it. But it was never written down that Network Rail were going to do it. The custom design and installation was not included in the price build up for stage 2, therefore. Yeah. Between stage 1 and stage 2, the client, not Network Rail, contract management team changed, and on realising that this requirement to actually do it was Network Rail were going to do it, the new project manager instructed a change to the scope, taking it out. Yeah, and as a result of that, it resulted in a project manager's assessment of to the tune of minus £300,000. Okay, so. John, is it a compensation event?
Well, John, Mr. Adjudicator and client, I hope you're listening very closely. The client and the project manager are clearly aware that no allowance has been made for the earthing and bonding of the depot. This matter was discussed at length during the NEC period, during the ECI period, and the client and the project manager are also clearly aware that though they, given through the audits that they undertook at building up the cost in interminable length, I mean, we saw about disallowed costs earlier. You want justification for those, you should have seen the justification we had to put through for our own estimates. There's no cost within our price for doing this work. The client's indecisions during the ECI period have made this job a nightmare. They've delayed the job, put us under considerable and unnecessary time pressure, and we are being made a financial scapegoat for their own incompetence. The ECI process is part of this contract, and the project manager is fully aware, irrespective of who the project manager is now, that no allowance has been made as the contract records will show. The project manager has no basis upon which to reduce the total of the prices by £300,000, and it's exceptionally unfair.
Okay. Oh, unfair. Oh, okay. Okay, Leslie.
Well, a lot of those emotional allegations related to our rigorous audit process are below my standard for a response. The contractor's obligation is to provide the works in accordance with the scope, which included the design and installation of the earthing and bonding strategy. The earthing and bonding design and installation strategy touched multiple areas of the works and hence was considered to be included within the pricing. When we realised that others would be undertaking the design and installation works, our PM issued an instruction removing the works from the scope and notified a compensation event. In accordance with the conditions of contract, our PM made a fair assessment of the CE of minus 300k. We made no change to the completion date, we had no prolongation costs, that's simply all we did.
Time to have a discussion. Okay, so I think you know the drill. So both blue and red up in the air, like you just don't care. And what do we have? Oh, we have a lot. Oh, yes, okay, we do, right. I don't know. That's quite evens, isn't it? It's 50-50, isn't it? Something like that, okay. Possibly slightly more red. Anyway, so the clauses we're looking at are option C clause, 55.2. There's the same under option A. Why did I look? It's an option A contract, I think I said. But anyway, information in the activity schedule is not scope or site information. So consequently, whether the contractor is priced for doing the design or an installation is irrelevancy contractually, although it does infer a common understanding. Okay. Clause 20.1 states the contractor provides the works in accordance with the scope. So we have to go back and interpret the words literally in the scope. So it is not in dispute that the contractor provided an earthing and bonding strategy in the ECI stage 1. Those words were not changed when entering into stage 2. So, in the contract, nor is it in dispute that Network Rail were to do the associated design and installation. It was not required from the contractor. So they were to do it if required. So the words in the scope are if required, which covers whether it is or not. It turned out it was not, yeah? Okay? But that doesn't mean that there needs to be a change in the scope to take it out, because it's if required, right? So regardless of whether the contractor priced for doing it or not, they have an obligation to do it if required. Turns out it wasn't. Consequently, no instruction is needed to put this into effect. Consequently, it's not a compensation event, okay? Which I have to say, when I dreamt up this example, I was thinking it was going to be the other way around. And then I looked at the words precisely, right? Okay. It's the if required. So what are the observations and the lessons learned? Well, the contractor's obligation is to provide the works in the scope, not the activity schedule. Normally, the contractor hasn't taken something off from the scope, hasn't priced it up, therefore they're going, I want payment for it. But when it's in the scope, tough, yeah? When drafting scope or looking at scope, use of optional words like may, the contractor may, or conditional if, think through the consequences. Now, perhaps not necessarily a red flag, but an amber flag to think about, well, what happens here if, or what happens if may, yeah? So think them through. And it was just a general observation on the current words in X22 for ECI. And if you look at how X22 has evolved since it was first written in, was it 2015 as an addendum to the 3rd edition, then incorporated into the 4th edition, and every successive iPhone S, etc., a version of the 4th edition they've changed X22. For me, it's always been 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. Yeah, a bit of an improvement, but why they've done that, yeah? And I noticed that by my reading of the current X22, I don't know how whatever proposals the contractor comes up with in stage 1 are actually incorporated into the contract as contractual obligations in stage 2. So that needs addressing, hopefully by the steering group. If you're thinking of X22, by yourself, yeah? Okay, so that's there. We did have a case study but it's not breakfast time, it's coffee and cake time, I am informed. Can we be back at 16:15 or 4:15? So that's a little over 15 minutes. when we've got Z clause of the year and question time.